Welcome to the Life Engineering Podcast. My name is Gabriela, former chemical engineer, relationship coach, and author. In each episode, we'll uncover the wisdom, strategies, and tools to help you build thriving relationships and purpose-driven careers. My wish is that something shared in this space touches your heart, brings clarity, or gently guides you toward what you need most in your life right now. Thank you for being here. Let's begin now. Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Life Engineering Podcast, where we explore what it truly means to create a life of no regrets in our work, in our relationships, and in our alignment with purpose. I'm your host, Gabriela, relationship coach and author of Becoming a Power Couple, 4 Pillars to Engineer Legendary Marriages. If you're a leader, entrepreneur, or high achiever who looks successful on paper but feels disconnected, perhaps depleted, or misaligned behind the scenes, then this episode is for you. Today's conversation will help you understand why no amount of strategy can fix what alignment must heal. And why joy, I love that word so much, joy, clarity, and healthy relationships are not soft skills, but the operating system required for sustainable success at work and at home. My guest today is the wonderful Greg DeKoker, a brand and culture transformation expert, executive advisor, leadership retreat facilitator, and best-selling author and podcast host as well. Greg has spent over 3 decades helping organizations unlock the true power of their brand and culture, not through surface level messaging, but by aligning people, purpose, and performance from the inside out. He's the co-author of Brand, It Ain't the Logo, It's What People Think of You, and the upcoming book, Joy Squared, The Hidden Power of Joy in Leadership, where he challenges leaders to rethink success, culture, and what actually sustains high performance over time. But here's what I appreciate most about Greg's work, is that it's not just about building better companies. It's about building healthier humans inside those companies. So Greg, welcome to the Life Engineering Podcast. It's such a pleasure to have you here.
It's so great to be here, Gabriela. Thanks so much for inviting me to be here. Yeah, I really appreciate it. Enjoyed our previous conversation. So thank you.
Yes, exactly. We had many conversations that led to this one. And I know a little bit about you, but I would like for you to share with our audience, who are you? What led you to this type of work? Or what part of your story you think they need to know in order to understand what's coming next?
That's a big question. Let me think about where I could start that from. I think I'll just kind of share a bit of an overview about kind of me and what drives me. And I've always been a personal development junkie and a human connection junkie, and very curious about relationships. And I remember back when I was young, I put my parents' relationship on a pedestal because they never fought. Fight. And for me, I realized later on in the work that I did that while that was a beautiful thing, and if I'm going to choose one extreme over the other, that's the one I would choose. Not that it's my choice. They made a conscious decision not to fight in front of us, which I think is a great choice. And it also didn't allow me to see conflict being resolved. So while it was kind of created a healthy kind of home environment, I also didn't develop the tools when I started developing relationships and when there were disagreements. And I was like, well, what am I supposed to do now? Right? Like, what do you mean you don't agree with me or you don't agree with my opinion? And it was uncomfortable because I didn't have the tools. I hadn't seen it modeled before. So I was really curious as to, what that means, different perspectives, different opinions. How do we connect? How do we maintain that those healthy boundaries and that healthy connection and support each other while we may not necessarily agree with certain, things? And yeah, I've taken lots of different courses. I've done a lot of men's work. I've done a lot of work on myself. And I think a big part of my kind of who I am today is I've been able to distinguish between stories and facts. That's been one of the biggest things that I've learned about, like, what is that bare bone fact? What actually happened? And then what did I make it mean? And I'll give you a quick example about my father and I and our relationship. And growing up, so my dad's an electrical engineer, so he's a perfectionist. He calls himself a practical perfectionist. I used to call myself a
It better
neurotic.
be, otherwise it could be dangerous.
Right, exactly. Yeah, exactly. So it comes by that honestly. I used to say I was a neurotic perfectionist. I don't say that anymore. That's not very positive. But I am still I'm a recovering perfectionist is what I say now. So growing up, my dad, there's always a better way. That's how he's wired. There's always a better way to do something. And he would show me, it was his way of kind of contributing. As a kid, I didn't really understand the real meaning behind what he was doing. What it seemed to me was whatever I was doing wasn't good enough because he was showing me another way. And then I interpreted that at another layer that I'm not good enough. And that's not what my dad wanted me to, he wanted me to interpret it, right? That's not what his intentions were in helping to make me a better, person and show me some different things and a better way to do it. So that was a really big one. It took me a long time. That wasn't an overnight thing. That was a long time. And that was a lot of, there was some therapy, there's men's work, there's other personal development. And I finally kind of got it. And when I saw it, I realized I got to call him right away. I've been holding off on that conversation because I thought what a great way to connect with my dad and share something that I knew would bring us closer together. And after that conversation that we had, the next time I saw him was the first time I didn't kind of have that like uncomfortable feeling in my gut, which is really special. And that's brought us together. So for me, I've been on a path to really figure out like how to better connect with people because there's so much suffering out there and too much suffering at work, in relationships, at home. And so that's been a big part of, my background is just helping to connect with people, helping to create joy, which is a big part of my purpose. So
I want to talk more about joy, but I
yeah,
have a follow-up question on your answer now, because I
yeah,
know, what I see when I work with couples, we definitely bring our relational patterns that we learn at home, we bring them into our couples relationship. So do you believe that leaders bring their relational patterns learned at home also to their workplace?
I do, Gabriela, because I think how we do one thing is how we do everything, generally speaking. So I think it's really hard to compartmentalize who we are as people at work and at home. I think there are those consistent things. They talk about politicians being able to compartmentalize. I just think that's tough to do. And I'm not even sure if that's even a necessarily a positive thing. Maybe there's probably certain situations, of course, where it is positive. But I think that that's all part of, who we are as leaders. That shows up, right? And whether it's conflict resolution skills we learned at home, what's relation stuff we're learning at, through our relationships. But I think that is who we're being is, I think, one of the most important things, that we need to focus on. If we're being loving, if we're being joyful, if we're being supportive, our actions are going to naturally flow out of that. If we're being angry, if we're being resentful, if we're being frustrated, then our actions are going to flow out of that. So I think it's important to really pay attention to how we're being.
I agree with you. I always say we have one nervous system and it's not divided in life areas.
Right. Oh, that's a great way to look at it. Yeah, I hadn't thought of it that way. You're right. That's why it's not like we have a personal, nervous system and a work nervous
That
system.
we switch on and off depending on where exactly.
That's right. Oh, I hadn't thought of it that way. I love that. That's a great perspective.
So you mentioned joy square. Okay, I want to explore this deeper. Let me start with the most basic question. Why is joy such a leadership skill
Hmm.
and not a soft skill?
Yeah, I really think that. Well, I mean, it comes down to, in the work that I've done, I won't go into a lot of detail, but in the work I did leading up to kind of the book brand Ain't the Logo, It's What People Think of You, we did a lot of one-on-one confidential interviews with different stakeholders, employees, clients, customers, suppliers, strategic partners. We did a lot of workshops, right? And so we really got to know confidentially and openly what was working and what wasn't working. And I realized that, and the research shows us that so many people aren't happy at work, right? It's the lowest disengagement in 10 years. And And I got really clear that people don't quit companies, Gabriela. They quit their leaders, they quit their managers, and they quit cultures. And that's a leadership responsibility. And joy, when people think about joy and happiness at work, often we think of kind of forced fun and toxic positivity. I'm not talking about that. I think joy is the most underutilized asset and the most renewable source of energy a company has. And if we lead with joy,
Can you repeat that before you add more?
yeah, I really believe that joy is the most renewable source of energy, right? And the most powerful asset a company has. It's the most underutilized asset, as well. So I think there's, we talk about financial capital and human capital and intellectual capital. We don't talk about emotional capital. And I think we need to. We're emotional human beings. And I think there's a real opportunity to really tap into that in a positive way. When we think about the typical corporation, it's almost like park your emotions at the door and then come in and get the work done. And I've asked probably 100 senior level executives that even if they're in alignment with, how I think and how we think and how important joy is and how important having a happy, high performing, joyful, high functioning culture is, I'll say, what do you think most senior level executives would think if they heard laughter in the hallway? Most, like the typical. And the answer is, even if they don't agree with this, that, they feel, and I do too, that most senior level executives would feel, oh, they're wasting time, they're goofing around, they're wasting money, they're not taking things seriously. And it's as opposed to, wow, we did a great job hiring. We did a great job of finding those fits where they listen how well they're getting along. That's music to my ears. Imagine how that's going to translate into meetings, into feedback, helping people feel seen, heard, and valued. So I've gotten really clear that, it's a leader responsibility to create those kind of cultures that people can thrive in. And right now, command and control isn't working. It hasn't been working in a long time, right? That management and by intimidation and by fear just doesn't work. I mean, what can we do to create more joy at work? I think if we create more joy at work, that's going to lead to more joy at home. If we create more joy at home, it's going to lead to more joy at work. I think there's just too much suffering. We're in the middle of a massive global joy deficit is the way that I've been talking about it.
Mm-hmm.
I want to help change that conversation.
Powerbomb. A
Yeah.
deficit. Wait.
Yeah,
Burnout.
you sure can. And disengagement and just so many, and sickness, dis-ease. We talk about that, right? Not being happy at work, not being happy at home. I think leaders need to really rethink what they're creating, the kind of environment that they're creating, and the impact that creating an environment where people feel safe, psychologically, emotionally safe, to bring themselves in, right? To bring all their full selves, their authentic selves in. We talked about that before. Is going to make such a huge difference. When people want to come to work and when they're excited about being at work and when they're engaged at work, then imagine the ideas, the connection with teammates, the innovation. They're happy coming there, right? They don't want to leave. Just everything improves, right? We've kind of looked at joy and happiness as the results of, like hitting the milestones and meeting the metrics and delivering on whatever the goals are that we've outlined. And those are all important. I just think if we look at joy as strategy, not just soft and sentimental and not just a result of the work, but really make it the real work, put it at the front end. How can we lead with joy?
You said so much here. First of all, it makes me think how previous generations perceive work as sacrifice. So we are not wired to feel joy at work. Genetically speaking, we're not wired for that. So that's one thing that came to my mind. But there are so many other things. It reminded me that I took a laughter yoga class, and my teacher,
Oh, I love that.
I will name her Liliana Di Leo. She goes into corporations and she does laughter yoga in corporations exactly to bring that aspect of joy and culture as you were describing. But then it made me realize the difference between, and I talk about this in relationships, the difference between gratification and relational joy. So gratification is performance based. okay, if I got this, if you gave me this, if we did this, if we went to the restaurant I wanted, if we did what I wanted, if we attain our goals, if we reach our KPIs, there's a lot of gratification. But relational joy is beyond what we're doing. It's about the connection, it's about the bond that we foster. And we can laugh even when everything goes wrong. We can look at each other and just laugh because we know we're in this together. And I think that we can look at this as part of the culture of the relationship, but also we can bring that into the workplace. So what you describe in the workplace, I bring it obviously into my world of couples and relationships. But I feel like there's a big parallel there. And joy as a strategy is maybe enables people to feel when they are at work that I don't have to be there, I choose to be there.
Yeah.
And I choose to be there because I believe in my leaders, because I believe in the company, because I believe in what I'm doing, because I enjoy what I'm doing. Even if, the project isn't going well.
I agree. I think, it's funny. It's, well, I mean, it's not funny, haha, but it's interesting. It's probably a better word. That people used to go to work, right? It was just to make money. It was just to pay the bills. And then there's the retirement aspect. And it's funny. I've had a lot of conversations with people about retiring. And it's almost like, not that everyone hated their job, but it was almost like that was just what you did. It's what you had to do to pay the bills, to, buy a house, rent a place, have a home, right? To go on vacations, to kind of pay for your experiences. And then at 65, you get a chance to really enjoy your life, right? And then you get a chance to do whatever you want. And you hear those stories about people, like passing away after they retire, not having that purpose and not having that reason for existence. And I think it's changing now. I think it's like, why not look at it like, let's have fun at work? Right? Employees are quietly quitting. That's a term that Gallup came up with, right? And this whole quiet quitting, that idea of you're not happy at work, but you also don't want to quit because you're dependent on the income, right? You don't want to speak up because you're afraid that if you say you're not happy at work, that maybe you'll get demoted, maybe you'll get let go. Why would they want to keep someone on board who's not happy, right? And so how do you have that conversation? And I'll just share a quick story if that's okay now.
Please.
Okay. And I presented to a panel of mining executives, and the gentleman who organized and invited me part of it, he said, this is going to be an interesting topic, leading from joy, right? The mining executives. And I said, I know it might be a tough crowd and I'm up for it, right? Let's see what they have to say. I'm always curious, right? And there's lots of different ways to approach it. It's not like I just have the right way. It's just about changing the conversation, and I'll explain what I mean. So sharing the different ideas leading from joy, and the kind of three pillars, in my opinion, of joy-led leadership: purpose, passion, and fun. And so I'm sharing the different ideas and the advantages. And one executive raised his hand and he said, Greg, I love this. I totally agree. I said, love your passion about, love your excitement. I'm on board. He said, but how am I supposed to have a conversation about joy with my guys? And in his situation, it was just guys. It was the miners he was referring to, the ones on the front line, right? And he said, how am I supposed to talk about joy with these guys? And I said, well, that's a great question. I said, maybe it's not about the word. Maybe you don't use the word joy. And I said, I think it comes down to, from a leader standpoint, do you care if your team is happy? Do you care if they're joyful at work? And I said, could you ask your teammates a question, your employees a question about, like, do you look forward to coming at work? Do you enjoy being at work? Those are big questions. And they could be very confrontational if you haven't paved the way. Because again, like, to answer it honestly, you may feel like you're putting your job at risk. So how do you kind of share information and try to help your situation and maybe your team situation, the company, without putting yourself at risk? And I said, and if you can't ask that's a big question. And if you're not at a stage in the relationship, there are things you can do to start paving the way to show that you care. Like, hey, is there anything I can do for you today? Just to make your job easier, or just anything I can do for you. Let me know, and start to kind of pave the way. Or even in a team meeting, hey guys, when was the last time we laughed as a team? Like, that's a great question, because it gives people an opportunity. And again, if you're ready for the answer and you're ready for the conversation, but it starts to pave the way for, I care about how you guys feel at work. I care about how if you look forward to coming at work, I want this to be and again, mining, when you think fun, you don't want to also think physically unsafe. It's not about child's play. It's about bringing joy into the workplace, whatever that means. And that's often connection with other people. That's being able to have an open conversation with your boss.
So I have a follow-up question to that. Can joy coexist with pressure, with responsibility, with high stakes?
Yeah, that's a great question. I honestly believe joy can coexist with anything. And there's a difference between happiness. They say when you're looking at the joy versus happiness, so joy is more of a grounded state and happiness is more circumstantial, right? Like when we achieve this, we'll feel happy. So you're typically, if you're grieving the loss of someone as an example, you're not happy, but you can still be joyful in the sense of you're grateful that you had that time with them and you're grateful they were part of your life, right? So joy, I believe joy can coexist with that because you need to have the hard conversations and not every day is going to be fun or not every day is going to be awesome. But overall, if you have a environment where you feel safe and you feel connected and you feel seen, heard, valued, respected, where you're building, then that's joyful. Maybe that day isn't a great day, but you're coming back tomorrow because you're knowing that, hey, that was a tough day, but overall, 80%, 90% of the time, it's great going to work. That yesterday wasn't great. There was a lot of pressure. Maybe I made a mistake, but again, that's part, psychological safety. Is it a mistake? Is it a lesson? How do you kind of create an environment where people feel safe and they feel heard and valued and there's joy is at the forefront and you're leading with it, not just hoping for it.
Thank you so much for clarifying all of that and for sharing that conversation you had in that conference. I think it clarifies a lot because I can see how someone can say, well, we're not going to be laughing every day with all the issues we have and the economy. But you made it very clear that joy can coexist even in today's economy. I want to switch a little bit to your align framework.
Mm-hmm.
Your system, your align framework, it truly resonates with my relationship work. So I have a question for you. If you could explain what the align framework is and then share where do leaders most often lose alignment? Do you think they lose alignment with themselves, with their teams, with their purpose?
Yeah, that's a great question. The Align framework is really something I've kind of been working on for years, and it's been part of how I coach organizations. And just real quickly, and the A stands for awareness, and it really is understanding we're getting a high level sense of the company's kind of brand and culture and what their objectives are. Like, why did they bring me in? So just understanding at a high level, and then L is listen, and that's really a huge part of everything that I do is really listening to the stakeholders, and that's where I'm interviewing one-on-one cross-section of stakeholders internally and externally. And I mentioned employees, different departments, different, varied degrees of tenure responsibility, and then a cross-section of their customers, their clients, whatever they call them, right? And then also a cross-section of suppliers and strategic partners. So really it's a reality check. It's listening to stakeholders. It's understanding what's working well. What can we build on? What can we celebrate? What can we leverage? And what isn't? What are those things that we need to deal with? And the great thing about having confidential interviews where their name never appears, it's building that trust right out of the gate. So the more honest you are with me, the more I can help you, your team, your company, right? So it's establishing that trust early on. And so that they know that their name isn't going to appear anywhere, even any kind of context that would lead it back to them, which, would make it confidential, right? So I'm very sensitive to that. And then the next one is illuminate. That's kind of like my book brand. It ain't the logo, it's what people think of you. We're finding out what people think of the company, right? What people think of the company, the brand, the culture internally. It's an incredible way to begin a relationship. And then illuminate is the I in Align. And that's now that we know people think of you, what do you want people to think of you? And it's usually 2 to 3 workshops I'd facilitate to help them clarify their essential truth. In the book, we call it Brand Foundation, what I now call Essential Truth. And that's their core 7 elements, their core purpose, vision, mission, values, positioning statement, and character. Those are the 7 elements that we clarify in a clear, concise, and compelling way. And then the G is galvanize, and that's really how do we operationalize your essential truth? That's a huge difference because a lot of companies, if they have a clear purpose or clear vision statement or mission. Often it's just the marketing department kind of doing their own thing on their own little island, and they don't operationalize it. So often marketing can be making these empty promises, and the rest of the company is trying to figure out how do we deliver on those promises, right? Most companies don't do a great job of that. So how do we operationalize it? And one of the things that I coach is using that essential truth, using their essential truth is their strategic decision making filter for everything they say, everything they do, every person, every department. So it drives that consistency and remarkability, and it drives everything, including their culture. So how do you have a culture either by design or default. So if you want to kind of design it or redesign it, often in situations that I'm in, what's that starting point? You need to be really clear about what you want people to think of you and start closing that gap from the reality check, right? That was that first stage at kind of listening to stakeholders, to the essential truth. How do we start to build the brand equity and start to kind of pave the way so that we're doing that? And then nurture, that's the last, that's really engaging the employees from the inside out. How can we roll out this through workshops, through brand ambassador sessions, brand orientations? How can we start to create those open conversations throughout the company, sharing what we've learned along the way? And I tell often, CEOs and executive teams, kind of once we get on this path, there's no turning back. That doesn't mean they have to use me for the rest of their lives. It just means you can't really, it's not great to ask your stakeholders for feedback and not do something with it. Doesn't mean you have to implement all 100 ideas or hundreds of ideas that are going to come through, which are amazing. But it just means you're going to have to acknowledge, hey, listen, we're on this path. We want to make things better. We want there to be more engagement. We want there to be more joy. We want this to be a better work environment. We want you to stay here. We don't want you to leave. Those are big conversations. And when you ask people for their feedback, it's like, hey, we've heard what you said. We're now reviewing everything. Here's some low-hanging fruit. Here's some things we're doing right now, just as a way to show you we're committed to this. This isn't an exercise in vain. We're really, or humility or whatever. We're literally on the path to make things different, right? So, and it's a great way when you listen to your stakeholders. And there's also surveys, online surveys. Sometimes, again, online surveys people don't always know that that's confidential. That's often in the concern. So it just depends on people, how they're going to respond to it. I like to do both. I like the one-on-one, the deep dive with this smaller cross-section, and then do the company-wide. So we're getting both perspectives. So that's kind of the aligned framework in a bit of a nutshell. I'll stop there.
Wow. That's a very comprehensive. It's everything from A to Z. So what happens when alignment is restored? What have you seen in companies? What changes?
Yeah, that's a great question. Let me think of I'm trying to think maybe an example, if I can think of an example that might be. There's one company that we worked with in Ottawa. After going through the process, it would have been 6 to 12 months later, we did a JD Power survey. They did it actually, and they found that they had it was the highest level of employee engagement they've ever had, and the highest level of customer satisfaction. In this situation, their customers were their residents, so it was a private residential community, privately owned residential community. And so we saw the difference, that was made. It was a challenging kind of exercise because there were a lot of things that needed changing. There's some people were let go, some people quit, and that weren't necessarily aligned with this, that didn't, agree with it. And ultimately we got to a really great place where everyone was aligned. And just as an example, the positioning statement we came up with for this company was, I won't go through all 7 elements, but the positioning statement was love your community. And I said to everyone, in leading the brand, the workshops internally and even with their residents. And I said, if there's one thing, internally I said this, if there's one thing you want to focus on, it's loving your community, because that means you're loving where you work. That means you're loving your job, loving the residents, right? In a way that you really want to take care of these people and in this community, people who call this place home. And that's important. So it transformed the way that they did business. It brought the team together, and it made such a huge difference with the actual team and with the residents. Everyone was happier. It was really an amazing process to go through over a few years. It doesn't
It's
always
very
take a few years.
very gratifying to know that that your work led to those results and shifts and impact. I want to end with one question.
Yeah.
What do you think is the question leaders most need to ask but often avoid?
What do I think leaders should ask themselves?
Well, either themselves or others. What's the question that, they need to be asking more, but
Yeah.
they might be avoiding doing that?
That's a great question. Is this a healthy, happy environment that people look forward to working in? I think that's the one that popped into my head. There's a lot of different questions, but ultimately, like I think if they don't believe, if they don't want to create an environment where people feel safe and they're happy and they enjoy coming to work, everything goes downhill from there, right? Engagement, loyalty, retention, innovation, customer service, everything. So, do they want that? I think leaders, are we creating that? Let's have an honest conversation, leadership conversation about, are we being intentional in creating an environment where people enjoy coming to work? That's the question.
Yeah, I can see how we might be so busy moving forward, surviving, putting on fires, up leveling, that we might forget to ask those deeper questions that matter so much. I
And
see
just
that
one,
in couples in relationships. So busy making sure the needs of the kids, themselves, work, money, everything is being met. And we forget to ask ourselves, are we creating a home environment where
that's a
we
beautiful analogy.
we feel this is home?
Yeah, I love that. And it's like, and I think too, it's not about adding more to leaders' plates, or in your case, with your analogy, even, more to the relationships plate, right? To the partners plate. It's about shifting and rethinking how we're leading in our relationships, and at work. So it doesn't necessarily mean like all these new programs and piling all these things on and adding so much more. I know how busy leaders are, and I approach it without judgment too. I go in and just say, hey, they're doing the best job that they can based on what they have right now. How can I help shift things in a better way? And those are the conversations that I have. And I think that's like the conversations you have with couples as well, right? You approach it in a similar way as well. So that's a great analogy.
Well, Greg, thank you. Thank you for this conversation. Thank you for reminding us that leadership, that culture, and joy are not strategies, they are ways of being,
Yeah. Thank you.
and not just strategies, but it's not soft skills either. It's a way of being. So I really appreciate you being here and sharing so generously your wisdom, your experience. Where can we learn more? Everybody, our listeners, learn more about your work and all the impact you are putting out there.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm literally in the process of rebranding now. And Gabriela, before I share that, I just also want to thank you for creating a space to have this conversation and being open to having this conversation. And I know we're in alignment based on all the conversations we've had. So thank you for inviting me part of this.
It's
It's
such
been
a pleasure to
an honor. Yeah, it's been
have you
my
here.
pleasure. Thank you. Yeah, it's been great. And so probably my website, Evolution, which is like evolution, but with an A. So EVOLATION.ca. So I'm rebranding everything kind of Joy Squared. So you'll see a lot of Joy Squared stuff coming up at Joy Squared Official. I do have my personal Instagram page as well, Greg DeKoker. People can find me there as well. And I look forward to continuing our conversation in the future as well.
Thank you, Greg. I really appreciate you being here. And I
Wow.
appreciate you listeners too. If today's episode resonated, take a moment to reflect, where my alignment or joy be missing? Where are you having a joy deficit? I like that. I wrote it down. In your life, in your leadership, in your relationships, and how you're showing up every day. So thank you for being here. I don't take this for granted. And I appreciate you. If this conversation sparked insight, please share it with someone you care about. And don't forget to subscribe to the Life Engineering Podcast so you don't miss what's coming next. Until then, keep designing a life and a relationship that work together with intention and no regrets. Thank you. See you next.